This week we read Parshas Noach. And the topic we will be discussing today is a topic of this week's Parsha. Nochri sheshavas chayev misa, yoim v'laylo lo yishboisu. Nochri sheyosek b'Torah chayev misa. Two sugyas in Masechet Sanhedrin, starting Nun Ches Amud Beis, Nun Tes Amud Aleph. Nochri sheshavas, Nun Ches Amud Beis, Nochri sheyosek b'Torah, Nun Tes Amud Aleph. So the Gemara says Chayev Misa. The Rambam, Perek Yud Halacha Tes, Hilchos Malachim, writes, Nochri sheshavas v'chein nochri sheyosek b'Torah, Ma'ken noisoi, oim shenoisoi, v'oimrem lo yishu Chayev Misa, v'al einoi neherag. These two isurim, these two prohibitions, are not included in Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. The Gemara asks why. Regarding Shabbos, the Gemara says because it's an isur that the person is over b'sheva al taisa. All the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach are prohibitions of Vedas that the person is over in an active way, not in a passive way. But regarding Nochri sheyosek b'Torah, that's kum v'asei. The Gemara says, Mimo nafshach. Why can't a non-Jew learn Torah? Moirosho kehilas Yankov. And the Gemara suggests two different interpretations, two different pshotim. Either marosha malosh and Yerusha. So if a non-Jew learns our Torah, it's like Gezel, or it's a Loshen Mu'urasa, engaged, so it would be somewhat similar to Arayas. And therefore, it is included in Sheva Mitzvahs. According to the Rambam, that's not a Savara Gemura. The reason Nochri sheshavas, Nochri sheyosek b'Torah, not the Sheva Mitzvahs, is because it's not the same level as the Sheva Mitzvahs. Lecha Mishnah says that when Chazal say Chayev Misa Mid'Rabbanan, and that's a tema. What does he mean Chayev Misa Mid'Rabbanan? Rabbanan can't be metaken Chayev Misa, neither b'dei Yodam nor Misa b'dei Shamayim. Misa b'dei Shamayim is a Kodesh Baruch Hu's decision. Kesef Mishnah on the spot, and it's actually in Chuvas Perador from the Rambam himself. Kesef Mishnah doesn't quote the Chuvas Rambam. Chayev Misa b'dei Shamayim. Not only in Torahs Yisrael do we have Misa b'dei Shamayim, Sheva Mitzvahs as well, Dinei B'nei Noach as well. Sheva Mitzvahs are Misa b'dei Yodam. Nochri sheshavas, Nochri sheyosek b'Torah is Misa b'dei Shamayim, and that is why they're not an integral part of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. They are excluded from the list because it's a different level. So before we deal with questions which are very, very relevant to halacha l'maisa, some of you might think, what is this nogeya? Is this relevant? Baruch Hashem, we're Jewish. We have nothing to do with Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. But I will share with you many shaylas. It's extremely relevant. Maybe not for the layman, but definitely for poskim. And even for laymen in many different fields, as we will explain. But before we touch halacha l'maisa, some fundamental questions. In this week's parsha, Mikan sheNoach lomad Torah, because the Kodesh Baruch Hu tells Noach, I want you to take from the chayes, from the behemoths HaTohores Sheva, and from the Minam HaTmeim Shnayim. How does the Kodesh Baruch Hu expect Noach to know which are Tohor, which are pure, and which are impure? Mikan sheNoach lomad Torah. Nochri sheshavas chayev, Nochri sheosek b'Torah chayev misa. The shiur today is focused on Nochri sheosek b'Torah. We will only briefly touch Nochri sheshavas. That's a separate sugya. So how does Noach learn Torah? If Nochri sheosek b'Torah chayev misa. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin Nun Tes asks a tremendous stira. On one hand, the Gemara says, Nochri sheyosek b'Torah chayev misa. Moirosho kehilas Yankov. It's a moirosha for us and not for them. But Reb Meir says, "Afilo nochri shiyosik b'Torah areu ki kohen gadol, shenema yekorhi mepninim." And Chazal's interpretation, pninim, is no trekon, it's an abbreviation, lefnai v'lefnim. Nochri shiyosik b'Torah areu ki kohen gadol. And the Gemara answers, b'mitzvahs didehu. Goyim are entitled. Not only entitled, they need to learn Torah because they have Sheva mitzvahs and they need to know how to perform those Sheva mitzvahs. And therefore, b'mitzvahs shalahem, in their mitzvahs, hareu kekohen gadol. B'mitzvahs shalano, chayiv misa. In my writings, I dealt with an interesting question. Nochri sheyosek b'Torah hareu kekohen gadol. That seems to be very extreme. The Kohen Gadol is the holiest man in the world. And there was only one and only Kohen Gadol. And he was the only person, once a year, in the holiest day, could enter the holiest place in the world, Kodesh HaKodeshim. Now, every guy is supposed to learn Torah. If he won't learn Torah, mitzvahs shalahem, how will he perform his obligations, his mitzvahs? So is the common non-Jew who is just serious about his Sheva mitzvahs, why would he be like a Kohen Gadol? I brought some early Gedolim that say, Hareu Kohen Gadol is an exaggeration. Chazal don't mean that he's like the Kohen Gadol. What Chazal mean is like the Kohen Gadol stands apart and he is unique. In the Jewish world, in the non-Jewish world, the chashuvs, the people, are those that are serious about their Sheva mitzvahs and they learn their halachas. But anyway, the mitzvahs shalahem, it's not a prohibition, it's not an aveira, lehefech. They're supposed to learn their mitzvahs. So in my understanding, when a Kodesh Boroku tells Noach, I want you to take Sheva of the Minim Tahirim and Shnaim of the Minim Tameim, Noach runs to the first base medrash he could find, takes out a year a day, and he learns the halachas of Minim, of Simone Yachayes Vabehemois. That is mitzvahs shelohem. L'doires olam, it's mitzvahs shelonu. But specifically for Noach, right here and now, he needs to know to differentiate between HaTorah ve'es she'einoi Torah, and that is like mitzvahs shelahem, so he's entitled to learn that. And then the other question would be Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the Oves Segregation. In Yom Achov Chesum et Beis, Avraham Zokom Yoshev Yeshiva, Yitzchak Zokom Yoshev Yeshiva, Yaakov Zokom Yoshev Yeshiva. U'miyameim shel Avoseinu lo yiporshu Yeshiva amen. And if Chazal say Avraham Zokom Yoshev Yeshiva, probably it's not Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. Ki yom Avraham Avinu kol haTorah kula ad shelo nitno, afilu erev tavshilin. How to do an erev tavshilin, you need to learn Hilchas Yom Tov. So the question once again is, Nochri sheyosek b'Torah, chayev misa. So how did the Oves Hagdoshim learn Torah? Both the Proshas Drochim, the Mishnah Melech, and the Maral and Gur Aryeh both argue the prohibition, the Aveira, the Issa for a goy to learn Torah is only Lacha Matan Torah. Because the Gemara offers two different sources. Why is Nochri sheyosek b'Torah chayev misa? Moy Rosho Kehilis Yankov. Torah Tzivo Lono Moshe Moy Rosho Kehilis Yankov. It's either Yerusha or Erusin. Benkach or Benkach, it is only after Torah was given to us. Only after Torah Tzivo Lono Moshe Moy Rosho Kehilis Yankov that they have an Issur. But before Matan Torah, in the days of the Ovis, there was no Issur. The Levush disagrees with the Maharal. And in Sefer Levushu Oiro, on Chumash Rashi, the Levush says, we do not find anywhere that Bnei Noach have a different din liyacha matan Torah than a Fnei matan Torah. And if Chazal say, Nochri sheshovas chayev misa, Nochri shoseb b'Torah chayev misa, both are the same. All the dinim of Bnei Noach were not nischadish b'matan Torah, but in the days of Adam Rishon and Noach. So the Levush disagrees with this pshat of the Maharal. Let me share with you my feeling. I said this many times, and it's brought in the name of Reb Chaim Brisker. Yes, there is a machlokes rishonim, whether the Ovis had a din Yisrael or a din b'nei Noach. And the Mishnah Lamelech wrote an entire sefer, Proshes D'Rochim B'derech Pilpul, and most of the sefer deals with this question. In Minchas Oshar HaTorah, I brought many sources. In this short shiur, I can't quote many sources. But it definitely is a machlokes and a shaynim. Oves HaKdoshim Vizarom and the Shavotim and all their descendants till Matan Torah, did they have a din Yisrael or din b'Noach? But Reb Chaim Brisker said, the question is, what was their din? But in Chefze, in essence, Avram Avinu was Jewish. He's our father. Avram, Yitzchak, v'Yankev, hem avoseinu hagedoshim. Kedushas Yisrael started with Avram Avinu. Yes, he was the first Jew. Noach wasn't, but Avram was. And therefore, regarding Avram Avinu, one cannot even ask, Nochri Shavas Chayev Misa, Nochri Yosik B'Torah Chayev Misa. They were not Nochrim. They weren't strangers. They were us, and we are them, and they were Jewish. So Minchas Oshar, I brought many drochim of Achronim. How were the Ovis Shoyim Shabbos, Nochri Shavas Chayev Misa, and all kind of perpulim? I think Reb Chaim is right, and it's so poshut. The Ovis Ekdoshim are not defined as Nochrim. Klal Yisrael started with them. So the machlokes rishonim is it shaykh to speak about din Yisrael if nation nitnu Torah Yisrael? If Matan Torah there was no such a thing as din Yisrael. Adayin lo nitnu dinam li Yisrael. But in essence, yes, Avram Avinu was the first Jew. So it's not a question either of Nochri Shavas nor or Nochri Yosik B'Torah. As I said before, these questions are extremely relevant in our world today. We interact with non-Jews in 1,000 different levels. And the most relevant aspect of these questions is conversion, gerus. What are we allowed to teach a ger in the process of gerus? This is a disagreement, a machlokes between the Marsha and Rabbi Akiva Eiger. The Marsha is in Shabbos Daf Lamed Aleph. The Gemara tells various different stories about gerim that came before Shammai Azokan and Hillel Azokan. It's not actually a sugya of gerus. The sugya is about Hillel Azokan and his tolerance and his midas and his patience. So we have a few stories, strange stories of gerim. One comes along and says, Shammai threw him down the stairs, and Hillel embraced him. Another ger comes along. Shammai throws him out of the house. Hillel hugs him and teaches him. The Marsha writes, so how did Hillel teach them Torah? The Marsha maintains, in the process of gerus, there is no issur to teach a non-Jew Torah. Rabbi Akiva Eiger disagrees. Shuvas Rabbi Akiva Eiger Madura Kamasim Malaf. And Rabbi Akiva says, even Mal v'lay Tova l'Rayu Kila Lo Mal. Until he finishes the process of gerus, he is a goy l'chol davar. Nochri Shavas Chayev Misa, Nochri Yosik B'Torah Chayev Misa. That's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Maybe that was relevant 200 years ago. In today's world, it's impossible. And I think the Marsha must be right. So in a generation, in a world of Amei Ratzim, Amei Oretz, maybe some goyim came along, I want to be Jewish. He knows nothing about Yiddishkeit. He doesn't even know how to read. He's totally illiterate. So you could just tell him, okay, mitzvahs, kalas, mitzvahs, mischamiras, and we're Megayer. Most of the converts that come today are fundamentally intelligent. Many of them are very, very intelligent, and they want to learn. And we teach them. Many years ago, I spent a Shabbos in Yeshiva's Torah Chaim in Moscow. I shared my experiences many times. It was a wonderful weekend, and it was very inspired. Yeshiva's Torah Chaim was founded by the Moshe Soloveitchik, a Gaon HaTzadik, the Moshe Soloveitchik from Zurich, Switzerland. And it's a wonderful yeshiva. At the time, and I don't think things changed much, about 50% of the boys learning in the yeshiva weren't Jewish. They were in the process of Gedus because after 70 years of communism, intermarriage was so rampant and so common behind the Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe that there were very few families in which both father and mother were Jewish. So 50% of the boys had a Jewish mother and the others had a Jewish father, and they were all learning together in yeshiva. And that yeshiva did a great job. I came back home from Russia, and this is a joke. I humorously told a friend, I know that you're looking for a shidduch for your daughter. She's a very special girl. I have a very special boy for you. I met him in Moscow. He's a real lamdan, and he has such a seichel hayosha. I looked at him when he davened Shemoneh Esrei, and you could see the yiras shamayim. He has wonderful midas. He even has a college degree. It's unbelievable. There might be one minor problem. He ain't Jewish. It's a little problem. He was in the process. He was not yet Jewish. And they asked me many shaylas, and I paskined. Teach them everything, whatever they want to learn. No tefillin, no tzitzis. No cheftzeh de kedusha. No cheftzeh de mitzvah. We need to leave something to inspire them and excite them after they will do Gedus. Otherwise, they won't feel Mayom Miyomayim. We're just doing the same we did before. So according to them, you could teach a non-Jew Torah in the context of Gerus. Rabbi Kiva Eger disagrees. So let me share with you my deep feeling. The Rambam, when he brings these halachas, Nachrish Shavas Chayim Misa, Osei B'Torah Chayim Misa, Einoi Mechadesh Das La'atzmoi. He can't fabricate new mitzvahs and new Torah. Goyim got Sheva mitzvahs, Jews got Taryag mitzvahs. And that is the way it needs to be. The opinion of the Rambam is, if a guy wants to volunteer, and totally on a voluntary basis, not as an obligation, he wants to perform Taryag mitzvahs, he will get sachar, he will get reward. Kodesh Baruch Hu will love those mitzvahs. He cannot be mechadesh das la'atzmai. So if a guy wants to learn Torah in the context of Gerus, he is not mechadesh das la'atzmai. The Torah he is learning ultimately will be Jewish Torah, not non-Jewish Torah. He wants to learn because he wants to be a good Jew. And the moment he sticks his head out of the water by the Tefillah and he's Jewish, he wants to perform all his mitzvahs as all the other good Jews. How will he be Mekayim his mitzvahs if he doesn't learn Torah, if we don't teach him? He needs to learn so much. And it's going to be late to start learning after he finishes Gerus. So even in the broader sense, even if it's lamdus, it's not exactly halacha lamaisa. But the Torah he's learning because he is in the process of being a Jew, and that is no isser whatsoever. The Aveira is only, he has no intention of becoming Jewish, but he would like to take some of our stuff, some of our Torah, Moirosho Kehilis Yankov. But he's coming in, and we help him come in. We're embracing him. In that stage, no issa whatsoever. Toises Yeshonim writes this Chiddush Lagabe Shabbos in Yavomis Mem Chesom et Beis. Toises Yeshonim says, Meshoshe Kibel Alatzmoi Les Gayer, he could keep Shabbos. This was a controversy 200 years ago. There was a ger in Yerushalayim in Eretz Yisrael after Milah, before Tefillah. And the question was, could he keep Shabbos? And it was a big machlokes ben Gedolei Eretz Yisrael. They sent a letter to the Orach Lener in Altuna. And in Binyan Sin we find this Shuva. And he writes, the minig is, he should be Machal Shabbos. Ani Akotan, I disagree. How could one quote a minhag? The Ramon Chashemishbet says a minhag is only shaykh if it's something that is common, something that's commonplace. There are more Gerim in 1 week today than there were in 100 years, 200 years ago in Europe. It was very, very uncommon. In most Christian countries and Muslim countries, it was against the law for Jews to receive converts. And they did not. And even in those liberal countries when it was not out, it wasn't against the law. But very, very few non-Goyim, non-Jewish people came to be Mizgayah. For every ger, there were 1,000 people that went in the other direction. So I don't think we could talk about a minhag. And I think when a non-Jew wants to keep Shabbos, in the context of Geirus, he's feeling Jewish, he wants to be part of Jewish destiny, he's entitled to keep Shabbos. And there's no need to impose on him to be Mechal on Shabbos. It's not only a Toises Yeshonim and Yevomis Mem Chesed Beis, it's a Medrash in Parshas Devarim. The Lashon of the Medrash is, Nochri Sheshoma Shabbos Ad Shaloi Kibel Al Atzmai Lamul Chayev Misa. Ad Shalo Kibel Al Atzmai Lamul. Kibel Al Atzmai Lamul Mashma Medivrei HaMedrash, there is no Chayev Misa. And that is my opinion regarding both Shmira Shabbos and Kal V'Chomer Talmud Torah. I also have another question. If we won't teach him Torah and so many different halachas, how would we expect him to be a good Jew? I mean, he needs to keep Shabbos. If he doesn't know Hilchas Shabbos, how would he keep Shabbos? He doesn't know Hilchas Tefillah. He doesn't know when is Shachas, when Minya, when the Mara. So how do you expect him to be a good Jew if you won't teach him Torah? And that's not Sheva Mitzvahs. So one could argue, Oynes Rachmona Patra, he'll start learning after his Geirus. That's an awful proposition. It's an awful proposition because he comes to us, Lachsos Tachas Kamfir Shchina, with so much excitement and so much emotion and so much feeling. And we'll leave him out in the cold and he won't be able to be Makayim Mitzvahs. That's not a very good idea. Of Aveda Vishana Nasas Loi Keheter. So this is a very amazing tshuva in Imre Yosha, Chelik Beisim and Kuf Ches. Rameir Arak was asked, a young Jew in the Polish army wanted to do Geirus, but he's in service, and he will need to be Machal Shabbos. And he tells that in advance. I can't keep Shabbos in the army because I'll be severely punished. Maybe my life will be in danger. Should we postpone the Geirus till he leaves the army and he'll be able to keep Shabbos, or no? Yevomis Mem Zayin, Shiur Mitzvahs Lo Mashinan. The moment the Beis Din is convinced that they get a sincere and really motivated to become Jewish, they have a mitzvah to accept them immediately. Reb Meir Arak Paskins, and he was the Gadol Hador in Galicia. We do the Geirus, Oynes Rachmona Patre. We are Megaya this person knowing in advance that he will need to be Machal Shabbos because that would be a Pikuach Nefesh situation. So in Lamdis one could argue he doesn't know the halachas Oynes Rachmona Patre, but I think that's an awful idea. And therefore my opinion is, in the preparation of being a Jew, one could learn Torah. Not only learn Torah, even keep Shabbos kach nera lanius daiti. Me'inyan le'inyan ba'oisei u'inyan. There's a Mishnah in Masechet Machshirin, saved at Aharas, Perik Beis Mishnah Zayin, brought twice in Shas. Yume Peidala Domed Beis, Ksubis Tezvav Amid Beis. What is the din of a baby that was abandoned and found? Yeshu Benachram Dina Kigoy, Rubi Yisol Dina Kisol, Machza Machza, very complex halachas. So what is he supposed to do regarding Shabbos? Does he need to keep Shabbos? Maybe he's Jewish. Does he need to be Mechanel Shabbos? Maybe he's non-Jewish. And I say the same. If the reason this boy wants to keep Shabbos is maybe he's Jewish, that's no Aveda. The Aveda is only a Goyish Shabbos, not a Jewish Shabbos. So if the reason he wants to keep Shabbos is maybe I'm Jewish, then that would be no Isur at all. Many shilas came to my table throughout the years about Nochri she'osek b'Torah chayev misa. Hagon HaTzadik Rav Avram Pam, he was called the Chofetz Chaim of America. I knew Rav Avram Pam, one of the greatest gedolim of our generation, a very small giant. When I say a small giant, his physical appearance was not very formidable. He was a small man, and such a gentle man, and such a giant in Torah, a giant in Yiras Shamayim, and the greatest of giants in Midas. Kibel kol odom b'sefer ponim yofes, such a soft-spoken, gentle person. I don't recall when he passed away. It's many years, but we miss him every day because there are very few gedolim like him. And he was very instrumental in opening up the Shuvu schools with a huge influx of Russian Jewry. And I was asked by some malamdim in these schools, we know that some of the boys aren't Jewish. And we teach them Torah. And we can't discriminate. They're sitting together in the classroom. So if one of the Jewish boys asks a question, we will smile and give him an answer and respond to him. And the boy that probably isn't Jewish, we will ignore him. That's impossible. So what do we do with Nochri she'osek b'Torah chayev misa? There are two different sugyas. Sanhedrin Nun Tes, Chazal deal with the prohibition on the goy. Banachagigi Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, Chazal say, Ein moisrem divrei Torah lanachrim. Besides, they're aveda to learn Torah, we have aveda to teach them Torah. And that is based on a posuk in Tehillim. Magad devorav liyankav chukom mishpotav l'Yisrael, lo yosach ein l'chol goy mishpotam al yadoum. Ein moisrem divrei Torah la'akum. So what are we supposed to do? Question number one. Some gedolim maintain that there is no Isser in Torah shebechsav, only on Torah shebal peh. So as long as you're teaching Chumash, Tehillim, you're on the safer side. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yisrael Mishklov, one of the greatest disciples of the Gro, Taklan Chadetin, Shkolim Yud Gimel Amud Beis. That is the opinion of the Netziv Meishav Dova Chelik Beis Siman Ayin Zayin. Marat Chiyas Agos Alashas, Chigigi Yud Gimel, once again, Soita Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis. Chuvas Mari Asad, Yoredei Siman Vav, Ben HaMachaber, the son of Mari Asad, who was ultimately to become a Godel B'Yisrael on his own merit. They all maintain Torah Shebechsav, there is no Isur. Rabbi Yosef Shaul Natanzan, the Sholem Eshev, writes a Askom on Chuvas Mari Asad, and in the Askom he disagrees with that Chiddush. And he writes, Chazal did not differentiate between Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh. Ein Moislim Divrei Torah Lagoy. There is an Isur, Kol Chelkei Torah. But I think the opinion that Torah Shebechsav, the Isur doesn't apply, is a very sound opinion. And I think it's based on two Gemaras. Soita Lamed Hey, when Yeshua ben Nun finally came into Eretz Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave a mitzvah to take two huge boulders, huge rocks, and to write on them Torah b'shivim loshon v'sadat oisem b'sid. And they were right at the Jordan crossing, by the Yarden coming into Eretz Yisrael. Who were those boulders, those rocks intended for? For whom did we need to write Kol HaTorah b'shivim loshon? Imlola umes u'olam. So obviously, this would prove that the Goyim are supposed to learn Torah Shebechsav. Gittin Daf Samach, the Gemara says, like Koras HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'risam Yisrael ela b'shvil Torah Shebal Peh. So the bond, the covenant between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Yisrael is primarily based on Torah Shebal Peh, like Koras HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'risam Yisrael ela b'shvil Torah Shebal Peh. So many Achronim maintain Torah Shebechsav we could teach Goyim. And I think, yesh lismoich aleihem. But that doesn't really solve our problem. Because in elementary school, we learn Mishnayos, we learn Gemara. So what do? And my psak was teach, and teach as well and as good as you can. The mitzvah to teach Torah to our brethren overrides the isur to teach Torah to goyim. And if the only option you have is not to teach Jews or to teach goyim, we will prefer teaching Torah to the entire class, because the mitzvah to teach our children, Hamalamed es ben ha'ma'oretz Torah, Gizar din shel shivim shona korom b'shviloi. That's a Gemara on Bav Metzia Pei. So the mitzvah to teach Torah to those kids, if we won't teach them, no one else will, greatly overrides the isur to teach Torah to non-Jews. One of the questions I dealt with, Choshev HaMashgiach wrote Sforim in Musar, Hashkafa, Midas Toives, and those Sforim were perfect for outreach. So he asked, could he sell them through Amazon, digital sites? Probably some goyim will buy those books as well. Is that a problem? And we want those books to be bought by Jews that probably won't come to Bigaleisen or to Yoni Posen in Eretz Yisrael. The only way to reach those young Jewish neshamas is through Amazon, or rather internet sites. But probably some goyim will buy those books as well. Is that a problem? I don't think so. First of all, for the same reason I just mentioned. If the only way to teach Jewish kids is by that medium, so yes, we will knowingly sell those books to goyim in order to sell those sforim to Yid. So I mentioned before, there is an aveir on the goy to learn Torah, Moirosho Keheles Yankov, and we cannot teach him Torah. Why can't we teach him Torah? Lo yosechein lechol goy mishpotam bal yadaum. Toises on the spot and Chigig Daf Yud Gimel asks, Lifnei Yeva sit in Michshel. If they can't learn, how could we teach them? Lifnei Yeva sit in Michshel. Toises answers, Lifnei Yeva is only Trei Avra de Nahara. If there's anyone else that could teach him, there is no Yisrael of Lifnei Yeva. But Toises in Shabbos Gimel maintains that there's an Yisrael Rabbanim Seyera de Yoivra Aveira. So obviously, selling Jewish books on Amazon wouldn't be Lifnei Yeva. There is so much Torah literature on the internet. You could learn 500 years without going into a Sforim store. So it definitely wouldn't be Trei Avra de Nahara. But would there be an Isser of Mesayera de Yoivra Aveira? Lani is daiti regarding non-Jews, there is no Isser of Mesayera. The Isser of Mesayera is based either on Arvis or on Mitzvahs Teichocha. We don't have a Mitzvah of Teichocha regarding our Jews, nor is there a din of Arvos. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bezeh. We don't have Arvos for non-Jews. I was asked many times, is there a mitzvah to teach Sheva mitzvahs to B'nai Noach? This is a trend that's gaining momentum. Many Sforim were written in recent years on Sheva mitzvahs B'nai Noach. Some of them are intended for Lamdonim, for Koilel guys, Lamdish Sforim and Loshen Kodesh. Many of them were written in English and French, and they were intended for non-Jews. Do we have a mitzvah to teach non-Jews Sheva mitzvahs? I think so. Because if HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them Sheva mitzvahs, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will, they should observe those mitzvahs. And if that's Ratzon Hashem, doing Ratzon Hashem is a mitzvah. I am very reluctant and not very encouraging of this endeavor. It is a mitzvah, as I explained, because it's Ratzon Hashem. But I think our obligation to teach our brethren 1,000 times overrides our obligation to teach Goyim what they need to keep. there are still millions of Jewish youth that don't even know to say the Posuk Shema Yisrael. Intermarriage is horrific. There is so much to do with Jewish kids, and I think that mitzvah 1,000 times overrides the mitzvah teaching Goyim Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach. So we need to dedicate our energies, our efforts, and our resources to bring our kids back home where they belong before we reach out to non-Jews. I am also quite afraid of backlash if we come out in public teaching Goyim what they need to keep. And in a way, it might cause anti-Semitism. It might be like patronizing. And I'm very skeptic about this. So many of the Machabrim of those Sforim asked me for Askama, and I was reluctant. I did not agree to give Askama. I think we need to be very careful with this endeavor. But coming back to our question, yes, we could sell books knowing that non-Jews might buy those books because it is the only way to reach out to our children. And this mitzvah would override the Aveda of teaching to Goyim. So I don't think it's Lifnei Yever because there's so much material out there and there is no Isser of Meseir de Yever Aveda regarding a non-Jew. And I also think Ein Moisrim Divrei Torah Lenachri, we cannot teach them, but we could sell books. Ultimately, they're the ones to decide whether they buy or they don't buy. And therefore, I don't think there's a problem selling Sifrei Kodesh on the internet, even though we know that some non-Jews will probably purchase those books as well. So I had a similar question. Very Choshev Talmud Chochem wrote a Perush on Tehillim. And the Perush is Shovel Achol Nefesh, a beautiful Perush based on Divrei HaRishonim. And once again, he wanted to sell it on Amazon or other digital sites I'm not aware of. I'm not into technology. I'm not so familiar. And the question was the same. But this question is twofold. Maybe non-Jews will say to them, they'll say psalms for Avodah Zarah. And they will learn Tehillim. So if they learn Tehillim, I already mentioned before, Torah Shebechsav, many Gedolim maintain there is no Isser. And I think that opinion is reliable. Yesh lismoich aleim. How about davening? The Ramo Yordei Kuf Nun Aleph Sif Aleph writes, you cannot sell to non-Jews objects of Avodah Zarah. Neither could you sell them Sefer Tfilos. But the Ramo is referring to their prayers composed by their religious leaders. Prayers they say in church, they say in the mosques. Tehillim is different. And especially if this Sefer is intended to Jews, even though some non-Jews might buy this Tehillim as well. According to the Rambam, Islam is not Avodah Zarah. They believe in monotheism. So they have their prophet, who was not our prophet, but their emunah, Bekel Echad, according to the Rambam, is a proper emunah. So if they will say Tehillim, let them go ahead and say Tehillim. It's a mitzvah for them. Even Christians, according to the Rambam, it's more problematic. But the Shach, Sif Koten Zayin, Kuf Nun Aleph, maintains Goyim Lo Nitztavu Ala Shituf. So the Intish Teshura, the bottom line, I gave a heter to Pliny to sell a Sforim on the internet, to Almoini to sell a Tehillim on the internet. We're reaching out to our brethren. And if non-Jews will buy those Sforim, Tovei Broch Al Rosham. I think the Isser of teaching Torah to non-Jews does not apply to Musar and to Midas Tevis, or even to Yiras Shamayim. It's part of their religious obligation as well. The Netziv maintains in his Haskoma to Avos Chesed that the entire spectrum of Ben Odom L'Chaveiroi applies to non-Jews as to Jews. Kol ha-mitzvahs ha-sichliyos. So I don't think there's an issue teaching them emunah, hashkafa, midas toivus. So those are the reasons I did give heiterim in the questions I just put on Shulchan Malachi. So let's come back to Parshas Noach. Mekan sheNoach lomad Torah. Noach seems to be the first human being that learned Torah. There's a Medrash Tanchuma that says Odom HaRishon didn't learn Torah. La'avda v'leshamra, but he did not learn Torah. Ila molay Odom lomad Torah loy hoyu meis. We find in Medrash Tanchuma. Sora doiris m'odam ad Noach hoyu oilam shamim. So Noach was the first to learn Torah. And that is very significant. And I want to share with you a thought from the Minchas Shel Ala Torah. So at the end of Chumash Bereshis, the Pasuk tells us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu Keviyochel regretted that he created man. Vayar Hashem ki rabo ra'asa Adam ba'oretz v'chol yetza machshavas liboy rak kol hayoyim vayanocham Hashem ki osa esa Adam. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides to destroy the world, to bring a mabul. V'noyach motza chen be'enei Hashem. And the world was salvaged and saved by Noach. And when Noach finally gets out of the teva, and he brings korbanos, Vayorach Hashem es reich hanechoyech, v'yomer Hashem aliboy. Lo yoisef lakal oid es ha'adama ba'avur ha'adam, ki yetze leiv ha'adam, ram ha'urav, v'lo osif od, lahakois es kol chai ka'asher osisi. It's almost the same wording as the end of Parshas Bereshis. V'chi kategor nasa senego. The reason HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides to destroy the world is Kol yetze machshavas liboy rak ra. And the reason HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides never again will I destroy the world is yetze leiv ha'odam ra. How could the same rationale bring HaKadosh Baruch Hu to destroy the world and to promise never again to destroy the world? However, when we examine these two psukim, we realize a striking difference, and it's so obvious, it's so evident. And the difference is in emphasis. At the end of Parshas Bereshis, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides to destroy the world, the pasuk says, Kol yetzer machshavas liboy rak ra kol hayoim. The pasuk in Parshas Noach after the Mabel is Ki yetze leiv ha'adam ram and urav. Yetzer, not kol yetzer. Yetze leiv ha'adam ra, not rak ra. Ki yetze leiv ha'adam ram and urav, no longer rak ra kol hayom. What made the difference? What happened between Parshas Bereach and Parshas Bereshis and Parshas Noach? What makes the difference is Torah. The old world versus the new world. The old world was void of Torah. Ein tikva la'achrisoi ve'ein sachar le'pu'ulosoi. Man without Torah doesn't stand a chance. There is no justification for a world that's not based on Torah. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Vayanocham Hashem ki yosu asa Adam, Rabba ra asa Adam ba'oretz, v'kol yetzer machshavos liboy, rak ra kol hayoim. The new world, all human beings are descendants of Noach. Noach lomed Torah. Shem was a great teacher of Torah. Noach's Enekel Aver was a teacher of Torah. Yaakov Avinu learned bebeis Shem ve'Aver. In the world of Torah, we still have great nisyonos. It's still an uphill battle, struggle and a challenge. However, we stand a chance. Yesh tikva la'achrisoi v'yesh sachar le'pu'ulosoi. Ki yetzer lev ha'odam ra me'ne'urav. But if you will learn Torah, yes, he stands a chance. And that is the difference. So it's the beginning of Chodesh Cheshvan. Yesterday was Rosh Chodesh. In Uzman, the yeshiva world has tremendous nisyonos in these days. We still don't know exactly how it'll work out with capsules, and it's a very difficult period for all of us, for the world, for the Jewish world, especially for the Torah world. So I've been crying and pleading and begging for months, wear masks, social distancing, follow the rules. But we cannot be without yeshivas, one way or another. We need the yeshivas. Mi'ameim shel avoseinu le'porshu yeshiva mehem. So we'll do our best to be careful. But mi'ameim shel avoseinu le'porshu yeshiva mehem. We cannot exist without Torah. And there can be no real Torah without Talmud Torah b'yeshiva. So we need to be careful. We need to do everything in our power to prevent the spread of disease, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help. We should be able to keep on our harbotzes Torah, lahagdil Torah velahadira, to learn Torah, to teach Torah. Ki heim chayenu va'orech yomenu uvehem nehege yomam v'layla. We should all have a gesinte winter, a healthy winter. And I said 1,000 times, we say these words every year, but this year they have so much more meaning and so much more significance. We should all have a gesinte winter and a good gebencht Jahr. Sheyeh shona toiva mesukan, we should be zoiche bekorov to be as Moshiach tzedkeinu b'mheiro v'yomeinu. Amen.